Jason Gibson had always known that silence was safer. At 16, he had already learned the brutal arithmetic of social hierarchies in high school. Having just moved from the wide, dusty fields of Texas to the gray, crowded halls of Lincoln High in Chicago, Jason felt like a scarecrow lost in a digital storm. His thick glasses sat awkwardly on his nose. His clothes didn't follow trends, and his southern accent made him a walking target. He kept his head low and his words even lower. Each day at school was a battlefield with no glory, only wounds that weren't visible to anyone except himself. The hallways were filled with laughter that wasn't his, jokes that pointed at him, and walls that swallowed his voice whenever he wanted to speak. His only solace came after school, in the silence of his small second-floor bedroom where sketchpads lived in messy piles. Jason had a gift, secret. While the world mocked him by day, he created worlds by night. Cities with impossible architecture, graceful skylines, and buildings that seemed to breathe. With a pencil in his hand, he was invincible, yet he never showed his drawings to anyone. His talent was hidden away, locked beneath layers of fear and the deep bruises of ridicule. His parents told him he'd find his place, but school had a cruel way of convincing him otherwise. He was never chosen in gym. He was never invited to parties. He was never even seen except when being humiliated. Rachel Ardor, on the other hand, was the definition of light. Her smile alone could cause a ripple of whispers. At 16, she was the queen of Lincoln High, cheer captain, homecoming favorite, followed by an entourage of admirers. Her blonde hair flowed like golden silk, her green eyes were wild with confidence, and every hallway she walked down seemed to adjust itself to her presence. She didn't need to try. Popularity followed her like a perfume trail. Everyone wanted to be near Rachel, and Jason, despite all logic, was no different. He admired her from afar like one would a distant constellation, brilliant, unreachable, and completely unaware of his existence. One Tuesday afternoon, something inside Jason stirred. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was a dream he didn't know he had the right to have. But during lunch, heart pounding, palms sweating, he walked toward Rachel's table. Her friends went quiet. Jason tried to smile, his voice cracking as he asked if he could sit beside her. Rachel turned to him with a gaze that felt like frost on his skin. Her words were sharp, smooth, and lethal. "There are no seats for losers." Laughter exploded around the table, and Jason stood frozen, the tray trembling in his hands. He turned and walked away, every step echoing with shame, every eye in the cafeteria burning into his back. The humiliation didn't end there. Day after day, the bullying intensified. His locker was vandalized. His drawings were torn when found. He became the ghost everyone loved to torment. Teachers noticed but said nothing. Friends, he had none. And yet he endured, quietly, unseen, with his art as the only refuge, the only place he mattered. But the final blow came at graduation. Jason had looked forward to it, not as a celebration but as an escape. That morning, he pressed his gown and adjusted his cap, telling himself this would be the last day he'd ever feel small. But when he sat down in the assembly hall, a cold wetness crawled through his robes. Paint, thick and black, soaked his chair, staining his gown just before he went on stage. The audience laughed. Cameras flashed. Jason received his diploma with a face burning red, clothes dripping in mockery. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just walked home, lowly, alone. That night he didn't draw. He burned every sketch he had ever made of Rachel, her smile, her eyes, even the dream house he once designed for her in a moment of foolish hope. The fire cracked in the trash can beside his bed, and with it, Jason Gibson made himself a promise. He would never be a loser again. He watched the flames consume every fragile line, every soft curve, every future he had imagined with her in it. He let go of every daydream that had ever made him believe he could be more than invisible. In that moment, something hardened inside him, a resolve born not of hatred, but of hunger. A hunger to rise, to build, to become. Not for revenge, but to prove, if only to himself, that greatness could be born from the ashes of humiliation. If this story is making your heart beat faster, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful romantic stories like this one. Hit that like button, and in the comments, tell us what kind of love story you'd like to see next. You dream it, we'll write it. The years didn't move gently. They rushed forward like a train Jason had no choice but to board. After graduation, he vanished from the lives of those who once ridiculed him. While former classmates partied through college dorms and stumbled through relationships, Jason worked and worked. Days turned to months, and months turned to years. He enrolled in the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where no one knew his past, where his silence was seen as focus and his solitude as brilliance. His talent, once hidden in bedroom drawers, erupted like light through cracks. Professors noticed. Industry leaders noticed. And slowly, the boy once mocked for being invisible became the man whose visions of glass and steel would change Chicago's skyline. Each structure he designed seemed to whisper the story of someone who had once been dismissed, someone who had survived by creating beauty from pain. At 28, Jason Gibson was no longer a name easily forgotten. His architectural firm, Iron Halo Development, became one of the fastest-growing companies in the Midwest. His name began appearing in magazines. His projects featured in exhibitions. But Jason remained elusive. Interviews were rare. Public appearances were calculated. Though he was now surrounded by influence and admiration, a wall stood firm around his private life. His apartment in the Gold Coast neighborhood was a glass penthouse with views of the lake, designed by his own hands, but it was cold, minimalist. No laughter echoed in its corners. No signs of love softened its edges. He told himself he didn't need companionship. Not anymore. The boy who had once begged for a seat now owned the table, and he sat at it alone by choice, or so he thought. Meanwhile, Rachel Arter's golden years dimmed into a softer, less glamorous reality. After high school, she had briefly enrolled in a psychology degree but never finished. Distractions came quickly. Parties, promises, and the illusion of a future wrapped in the strong arms of Arthur Grid, the school's baseball star. They married young, as many do, still thinking that high school love could weather adult storms. But 8 years later, the truth was undeniable. Arthur was a man who hadn't grown. His days of fame died after a shoulder injury ended any dreams of a professional career. Now he drove a taxi, resenting the world that no longer cheered for him. The tension at home was thick. The fights came daily. His anger was louder than his apologies. Rachel, once adored by all, now found herself unseen even in her own kitchen. They lived in a modest apartment in a rougher part of town. The fridge was often half empty. Bills were always late. Rachel worked part-time at a local boutique, but it barely covered groceries. The idea of having children, a dream she had clung to for so long, faded each month with the sound of slammed doors and cold silences. Sometimes she stared at her reflection, trying to remember the girl she used to be. Her beauty had matured, but her eyes had dulled. The sparkle that once drew hearts now hid behind tired lashes. She felt like a passenger in a life that kept moving without asking her where she wanted to go. And one night, after a particularly violent argument with Arthur about money, Rachel packed a suitcase and left. No tears, no begging, just silence and resolve. For the first time in years, she stood alone in the middle of a city that no longer felt familiar. The skyline didn't comfort her. It intimidated her. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Maybe it was the same thing that once made a shy boy speak to her in a cafeteria. Oh, Rachel began applying for jobs. Dozens. She swallowed her pride and accepted rejections like pills. One morning, while scrolling through job boards on her cracked phone at a cafe, she saw a listing. Receptionist needed, Iron Halo Development. The name meant nothing to her. It was just another opportunity. A building with glass windows and polished lobbies. Maybe she thought it would be different. She applied. A week later, she received a callback. And a day after that, she was offered the job. Her interview had gone surprisingly well. And for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at her like she mattered. She didn't know that the person behind the company, behind the logo on the wall, behind the office she now entered daily, was someone she had forgotten completely. Or rather, dismissed entirely. She arrived early on her first day, dressed simply but elegantly. Her blonde hair was shorter now, but she still had the same magnetic presence, even if she didn't feel it. The front desk became her new stage, and though she smiled at every guest, she was careful to keep her heart guarded. She needed stability, not romance, healing, not complications. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Because as she arranged brochures on the counter that morning, a tall man stepped into the lobby, dressed in dark jeans and a clean white shirt, clipboard in hand. He walked with confidence but not arrogance. He glanced at her, then froze. His breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. But it was. Rachel. Asen hesitated at the lobby entrance longer than he should have. Time seemed to fold over itself as he stared at the woman behind the reception desk. The years hadn't erased her beauty, only refined it. Her features were softer now, more mature, but the eyes were unmistakable. Green, piercing, unforgettable. He could still hear the echo of that lunchroom moment in his mind. There are no seats for losers. A phrase so casually cruel, yet it had clung to his memory like thorns to skin. And there she was, Rachel Arter, the girl who once made him feel invisible, now sitting feet away, unaware of who he had become. She smiled politely, not recognizing him. Of course she didn't. Why would she? He wasn't that awkward kid from Texas anymore. He was taller, sharper, confident. A man built by scars she helped create. Jason took a deep breath. Decided not to reveal himself. Not yet. "Morning," he said, offering a nod. "I'm Jason. One of the security field guys." It was a half-truth. He wasn't ready to be Jason Gibson, CEO, not to her. Rachel's polite smile widened, completely unaware of the storm quietly forming behind his calm expression. "Nice to meet you, Jason," she said, tapping on her monitor. "Hope your shift's an easy one." He replied with a chuckle and moved past her, heart racing. Back in his office, he watched her through the lobby cameras. Not out of malice but disbelief. How had fate placed her at his front desk? What was the universe trying to tell him? He thought he had buried his past, poured concrete over it like a forgotten foundation. Yet here it was, walking, breathing, offering visitors coffee with the same lips that once spat rejection. But something was different now. She didn't have the same arrogant glow. Her posture wasn't cocky. Her voice wasn't drenched in superiority. There was a gentleness, a trace of sadness, maybe even humility, and that intrigued him. Against his better judgment, Jason felt a familiar tug in his chest, one he hadn't allowed in years. He wanted to know more. Not as the boss, as the boy who had once longed for her attention. Over the following weeks, Jason made a habit of passing through the lobby more often. First it was brief greetings. Then came small conversations. Weather, coffee preferences, weekend plans. Rachel was always kind but reserved. She didn't flirt, didn't ask questions about his life. She treated him like any other staff member, and that only deepened his curiosity. He found himself looking forward to their exchanges, crafting reasons to stop by, pretending to check on things that didn't need checking. Each smile from her chipped away at the walls he'd built. And slowly, their conversations lengthened. One day, she complimented his sense of humor. Another, she asked if he always works so early. He responded vaguely, careful to maintain the illusion. There was a power in being anonymous. He could observe her without the filter of reputation, without the distortion of success. She didn't want anything from him, because she didn't know what he had to offer. And strangely, Jason found peace in that simplicity. Rachel, on the other hand, began to notice the quiet charm of the tall security assistant. He was different from the men she'd known. He listened without interrupting, laughed without mocking, and looked at her, not through her. She didn't know why, but there was a calmness in his presence, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was safe. And in a world that had shaken her trust so violently, that safety meant everything. She caught herself thinking about him at night, wondering what kind of man he really was. His eyes carried depth, like someone who had seen things, survived things. And though he dressed modestly, there was grace in his mannerisms that didn't match his supposed job. Something didn't add up, but she didn't press. She liked the mystery. It made her forget, for brief moments, the mess of her past. For the first time in ages, Rachel began looking forward to her mornings. Not for the paycheck, but for the smile that waited behind the lobby door. But shadows don't stay silent forever. Arthur, bitter from the separation, began making appearances at her apartment building. Sometimes drunk, sometimes angry, always manipulative. He begged, he threatened, he cried, then he insulted. Rachel tried to stay strong, but the emotional toll was exhausting. She never told Jason, still believing he was just a security guy with no place in her personal drama. But one morning, her hands trembled at the keyboard. Jason noticed. "Rough night?" he asked gently. She smiled weakly, brushing it off with, "Just tired." He didn't press, but he noticed the bruise near her wrist, faint but real. It boiled something inside him. Memories of his own mother's silent pain returned like ghosts. That evening, Jason requested access to her personnel file. It was a breach of his own protocol, but he had to know. As he read the resume, saw her name spelled out fully, it hit him like a train. Rachel Arter. He hadn't imagined it. It was her. And now he had to decide. Reveal the truth, or keep playing the role of the silent stranger in her life. That night, Jason stood at his penthouse window, watching the city flicker below. He poured himself a glass of wine but didn't drink it. Instead, he opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside were sketches. Old, fragile, almost forgotten. Dozens of pages from high school notebooks. Drawings of her. Rachel. Every angle of her face. Every variation of her smile. He had drawn her when no one knew. When no one cared. Back then, those drawings were his refuge. Now they were relics. He held them in trembling hands and whispered to the past, "I never forgot you." But was that boy still inside him? And more importantly, did she deserve to know? Rachel's routine gradually began to orbit around those fleeting moments with Jason. She didn't understand why a conversation about coffee brands or a shared joke about faulty elevators could linger in her thoughts all day. But they did. There was something gentle about him, something that made her feel visible. Not as a failed dream or a broken wife, but as a woman still capable of being seen, of being valued. And the most comforting part, he didn't know her past, or so she thought. He didn't know about the divorce or Arthur, or her shattered degree that now lived at the bottom of a drawer. She had started over from scratch, from receptionist, from zero. And yet, in his company, it didn't feel like failure. One morning, she brought him a coffee as he walked in. "Try this one," she said. "Colombian roast. Stronger than your usual." Jason smiled and took it. "You trying to corrupt my caffeine habits?" She laughed, and he savored the sound. Neither of them said it aloud, but their mornings had begun to mean something. Jason, meanwhile, lived in a storm of conflict. The more time he spent with Rachel, the more he saw of the woman behind the high school persona. She wasn't the arrogant cheerleader anymore. She was vulnerable, raw, determined. He caught glimpses of pain behind her smiles, exhaustion in her posture. But even through that, she radiated warmth. And it shook him, because part of him wanted revenge, to see her humbled, to show her what he had become. But a louder part, the better part, just wanted to hold her, to tell her she was safe. Still, he kept his secret. Every day he put on his metaphorical uniform, pretending to be one of the crew. It was strange how freeing it felt, being invisible again, but this time by choice. He didn't want her to like him because he was successful. He wanted her to like him for the man he'd become, forged not by money but by fire. And as the days passed, that fantasy became harder to maintain. His assistant warned him, "Sir, you can't keep walking around the lobby like your staff. People will talk." He nodded but ignored it. One afternoon, while Jason reviewed project proposals in his office, an urgent call came from the building manager. There had been a commotion at the front desk. He rushed down, heart pounding, and found Rachel pale and shaken. Arthur had come, drunk, loud, aggressive. He'd slammed his hand on the counter and demanded to speak to her. Security had removed him, but not before he shouted things that made every eye in the lobby freeze. "So this is what you left me for? A guy in a vest with a clipboard. Classy ratch." Jason clenched his jaw. His instinct was to protect, to confront Arthur and end it all. But he knew the cost. Revealing himself now would shift the balance, shatter the fragile peace between him and Rachel. So he stayed silent. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, but tears shimmered in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "He's not dangerous, just angry." Jason wanted to say, "You don't owe him an apology." But instead he said, "You don't have to go through this alone." And for a second her guard dropped. That night Rachel cried in the bathtub. Not for Arthur, not for the humiliation, but because of the kindness in Jason's voice. Because in a world that had only ever taken from her, someone was giving, listening, seeing. She curled into herself, clutching the towel, wondering what she had done to deserve someone like him. And yet, something didn't make sense. His vocabulary, his confidence, his insight into company operations, it didn't match a security role. Her instincts whispered questions, but her heart silenced them. Maybe she told herself some people just carried more than they showed. And maybe she didn't need to know everything to be grateful. The truth, however, always rises, and fate, like glass, eventually cracks. That Sunday, while organizing files, Rachel was asked to deliver some folders to the executive floor. She hesitated but obeyed. She'd never been allowed up there. When she stepped into the glass hallway, her breath caught. This place was pristine, almost sacred. Then she saw it. Jason, walking out of the main office, not with a clipboard, but in a tailored suit. Confident, polished, untouchable. Their eyes met, and the world stopped. "Rachel," he began, voice low. But she shook her head. "You lied to me." He opened his mouth, but she raised her hand. "You let me embarrass myself. I told you things. I let you in. And all this time you were, what, testing me?" Jason stepped closer. "No, it wasn't like that. I needed to see who you were without knowing who I was." She scoffed, blinking fast. "That's not how honesty works, Jason." The walls of warmth between them collapsed in seconds. She turned and walked away. Folders clutched to her chest like armor. He didn't follow. He stood in the hallway, heart caving in on itself, wondering if he had just destroyed the only real connection he'd ever had. And Rachel. She walked into the elevator and let the tears fall. The lobby was no longer a place of comfort. It was a place of betrayal. She had opened a door in her heart, and now the wind rushed in, cold and cruel. The following week, Rachel submitted her resignation. She said it was a personal decision. No one questioned her. Jason saw the letter on his desk and stared at it for hours. She didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. He wanted to call her to beg her to stay, but pride kept his hands frozen. Days passed, then weeks, and her absence was unbearable. The front desk felt empty. Coffee tasted dull. Meetings became noise. He tried to focus on his projects, on numbers, deadlines, proposals. But his heart wasn't in them, because the truth was simple. He missed her. Not the girl from high school. Not the woman at the desk. He missed the laughter, the vulnerability, the possibility. But she was gone. And somewhere in the city, Rachel was starting again. She took a job at a rival firm. Nothing glamorous, just data entry. But it was clean, quiet. She needed that now. She needed distance. Or so she told herself. Every night she stared at her ceiling, asking the same question. Why did he lie? Jason knew he couldn't let it end like that. So he planned something reckless, public, unignorable. He gathered every sketch he had ever drawn of her. High school pages, college notebooks, napkin doodles, and curated them into a private gallery space he owned downtown. He invited only one person, Rachel. No RSVP required. No message. Just a letter with an address and a time. She stared at the envelope for hours before deciding. When she stepped into the gallery, soft lighting bathed the room in gold. And there, on every wall, was her face, her eyes, her smile. Decades of silent admiration now immortalized in graphite. At the center stood Jason, silent, waiting. She looked at the drawings. Dozens of them. From the cafeteria in 2005 to a napkin sketch from 3 weeks ago, when she had laughed at his bad joke. Her breath hitched. You kept all this. He nodded. You inspired all this. Rachel's eyes filled. Why? His voice cracked. Because even when you couldn't see me, I never stopped seeing you. Rachel stood in the center of that gallery, her chest rising and falling with uneven breath, as if everything around her had frozen in time and only she moved within some alternate dimension. The walls pulsed with memories she never imagined anyone, especially Jason Gibson, would have held on to so carefully for so many years. She stepped closer to one drawing of herself laughing, seated on a bench in the school courtyard, her hair tied back, her hands resting on her knees, captured in a moment of pure, genuine happiness. I didn't even remember this moment, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Jason approached quietly, giving her space to absorb it all. But I remembered, he said softly, his voice low and hoarse, like someone carrying an old ache. Rachel looked at him, her eyes filled not with anger anymore, but with sorrow for all that had been lost. You used to draw. All this time, she asked. He nodded. Since before Texas. It was how I escaped, how I survived. She walked to the center of the room, where an easel stood with a canvas draped in white cloth. Jason moved beside her in silence, as if asking permission with just a glance. Rachel gave a small nod. Jason pulled back the cloth, revealing a portrait of Rachel gazing at the horizon. Her eyes intense and serene, like she was seeing something far beyond the present. It was her, but it wasn't. It was a version of her even she didn't recognize. Strong, whole, free. That's how I began to see you. After you came back into my life. Rachel felt a knot in her throat. The image wasn't about beauty or nostalgia. It was about how he saw her now. You lied to me, Jason, she said firmly, but without anger. He breathed deeply. I did. And it was cowardly. I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd only see the boy you once humiliated in front of everyone. She closed her eyes, and for a moment everything returned. The words she said, the laughter, the shame. I was cruel, she admitted. And you gave me more than I deserved. They stood there, frozen in the vulnerability of two people too broken to pretend they didn't feel. Rachel gently touched one of the drawings, and Jason watched her like someone witnessing a prayer whispered through trembling fingers. Do you still feel anything for me? She asked, afraid of the answer. Rachel, he replied, stepping forward. I never stopped. For now, I choose to love you with my eyes wide open. No idealizations, no perfect memories. You're imperfect and so am I. But if we're going to start over, let it be knowing everything. She swallowed hard. And if I don't know yet whether I can trust again, Jason smiled sad. Then I'll wait. Because loving someone means respecting their time too. Rachel closed her eyes again, tears falling, not for what they'd lost, but for what might still be possible. And in that moment, among the sketches and soft light of the gallery, silence lingered. But not an empty silence. It was the kind that rebuilds. The following days were filled with real silence. Rachel didn't reply to messages, didn't call, didn't show up. Jason didn't push. He simply tried to return to his routine. But nothing felt the same anymore. Meetings became mechanical. Projects lacked color. It was as if that gallery had taken what was left of his soul. Then, one cold Wednesday morning, Jason went on a site visit to a new construction on the outskirts of Chicago. And there, beneath a light drizzle, his heart froze. Rachel, wearing a hard hat, stood next to a site engineer from the rival company, reviewing blueprints. She saw him too. Their eyes met for just a brief but powerful moment. She quickly looked away and kept working. Jason respected that. But inside him, something reignited. He wouldn't give up. She was still there, alive, strong, rebuilt. He just needed to find a way back across the bridge. That same week, Jason visited a youth shelter he privately supported, filled with teenagers from abusive homes. Upon entering, he noticed a 13-year-old girl sketching in the corner of a quiet room. He sat beside her, complimented her work, and confessed he used to draw too. She smiled. Do you think I could do this when I grow up? And in that moment he saw Rachel. He saw the echo of the woman who survived a suffocating marriage, who left everything behind to start fresh, who chose to believe again, who allowed herself to see beauty again. And he understood. He didn't need Rachel to love him for his life to mean something. He needed to love her the way she deserved, even from a distance. That was real love. Not the kind that demands, but the kind that gives. Not the love that needs guarantees, but the kind that plants flowers in the desert. Back in his car, Jason typed a short message and sent it. Thank you for letting me see you again. You taught me what love without conditions really means." Rachel read the message on a rainy night, wrapped in a blanket, her heart a blend of confusion and longing. She didn't reply, but the gesture, stripped of expectation, hurt in a different way. That night she dreamed of him. She dreamed of the gallery, of the drawings, of the girl who once mocked a shy boy, and of the woman who cried in front of the man who forgave her. The next morning, unsure exactly why, she drove to the beach. The place she once said she wanted to get married, back when it was all teenage dreams. She sat there, watching the gray sea crash into the rocks, and asked herself what she really wanted. Not what others expected, not what looked right, but what set her chest on fire. And the answer was clear. She wanted to start over, with him. Not out of guilt, not out of nostalgia, but because he saw her when she couldn't see herself. And she knew that kind of love was too rare to throw away. The day started quietly, almost ironically peaceful, given what was about to unfold. Jason arrived at his office early as usual, but there was a subtle tension in the air that he couldn't shake. His assistant knocked softly and informed him that a man was waiting downstairs, refusing to leave. Jason sighed, thinking it might be another contractor, but as he stepped into the lobby, he found himself face to face with someone from a different life, Arthur Grid. His eyes were bloodshot, and he reeked of cheap whiskey and fury. "You think you can take what's mine?" Arthur spat, his voice loud enough for several employees to turn their heads. Jason didn't flinch. "I didn't take anything from you," he replied calmly, trying to de-escalate. But Arthur stepped closer, his finger stabbing the air. "You're screwing her, right? That's how she got that job. You think I don't see what this is?" Jason's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "You need to leave. Now." But Arthur wasn't finished. He lunged at Jason, pushing him hard against the glass wall of the lobby. Several staff rushed to separate them. Rachel, who had come by to return some forgotten documents, walked in at that exact moment, her face blanching at the sight of Arthur screaming and being dragged away by security. Jason fixed his tie, brushed himself off, and looked at her. But Rachel didn't speak. Her face twisted into a mix of disbelief and disappointment. "Why didn't you tell me he'd come here?" she asked later, when they sat in the small back office. "I didn't want to worry you," Jason confessed. "I thought I could handle it." She shook her head, blinking back the sting of tears. "He's unwell, Jason. Dangerous. But this isn't about him. This is about us. And the fact that he even believes I got this job because of you." Her voice trailed off, breaking under the weight of humiliation. Jason reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "It's not just Arthur," she whispered. "It's me. I don't even know who I am when I'm near you anymore." Jason watched her leave that day with a hollow ache gnawing through his chest. The gallery, the confessions, the drawings. None of it seemed to matter now. Not when her world was still tangled in guilt and fear. That night, he stayed late at the office, sketching feverishly, as if the graphite could trap his pain. One of the security guards brought him a coffee and simply said, "You've got it bad, huh?" Jason gave a tired smile. "Worse than bad." Meanwhile, Rachel sat at her small apartment, staring at old photos of her wedding, of Arthur smiling like someone who hadn't yet become a stranger. She burned them that night, not out of hate but out of closure. She realized she was tired of living halfway, tired of dragging old ghosts into new rooms. But love wasn't a painting. It wasn't a moment frozen in beauty. It was messy. It was showing up even when things got ugly. And if she wanted something real, she'd have to be brave again. The following morning, Rachel handed in her resignation. Not because of Jason, but because she needed to stand on her own again. She accepted a position at another architectural firm. Smaller, less glamorous, but hers. Her effort. Her merit. When Jason received the email, he didn't try to stop her. Instead, he sent a single bouquet of white tulips to her new office with a note. "You're braver than you know. I'll always be cheering for you." Rachel didn't respond, but she kept the card. Days passed. Weeks. And during that time, Jason disappeared from her orbit. Not in bitterness, but in respect. He knew love had to let go sometimes to truly be love. Still, something had shifted in Rachel's heart. Every corner she turned, she expected to see him. Every coffee shop, every city street whispered memories. She missed his quiet steadiness, his ability to listen, the way he looked at her like she was art, not chaos. Then came the art exhibit. A local charity was hosting an anonymous gallery night to raise funds for troubled teens. Rachel was invited by her new firm to attend as a representative. She almost didn't go, but something tugged her there. When she entered the hall, her breath caught. One wall was filled with sketches. She recognized the style instantly. Jason's. But there was no name, no signature. Just raw, painful beauty. One drawing stopped her cold. It was a charcoal rendering of her walking away. Her back turned, shoulders strong, but a single tear falling down her cheek. Underneath, a small handwritten line. "Sometimes the bravest thing is walking away. But the rarest love stays anyway." Rachel turned, her eyes scanning the crowd, and there he was, in a black suit, standing quietly behind the last row of guests, watching her with a look that was both permission and invitation. She walked to him slowly, the world around them dimming into background noise. "Why do you do this?" she asked, voice trembling. "Because I meant it," Jason said. "Every word, every sketch. I love you, Rachel. And I will, even if it's from across the room." She exhaled shakily. "You make it hard to breathe, you know that?" He laughed softly. "You always made me feel like I was flying." Silence fell again. But this time it felt like music. Rachel touched his face. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Of trusting. Of failing again." Jason leaned in, his forehead against hers. "Then let's be scared together. But don't run. Not this time." Her tears returned, but they didn't sting. They healed. The past was still there. But so was something new. Something that had survived rejection, shame, years apart, and the bitter weight of regret. Love. Not the high school fairy tale, but the hard-won, tested kind that stays. The kind that remembers. The kind that returns. The kind that stands still and waits at a crowded gallery just for one last chance. That night, Jason walked her home. No grand gestures. No promises made too quickly. Just silence. And the rhythm of two hearts remembering how to beat near each other. Before she went inside, Rachel looked up at him and said, "I used to think love was about finding the perfect moment. Now I know it's about surviving the broken ones." Jason kissed her forehead gently. "We still have more pieces to find," he whispered. And with that she disappeared inside. But Jason smiled. Because this time she didn't slam the door. She closed it softly. The storm had not passed, but the sky had cracked open. And through that crack, a sliver of hope broke through. A fragile beginning wrapped in everything they had survived. It was no longer about fixing the past. It was about choosing the future. Together, one quiet step at a time. The morning sun was soft and golden, casting long shadows on the quiet beach where Jason and Rachel stood side by side, barefoot on the cool sand. No guests, no crowds, just the endless blue of the ocean and the whispered promises of the wind. A single pastor held the small book in his hands, his voice steady but gentle as he spoke words that felt like a balm on their worn souls. Jason looked at Rachel. The girl who once dismissed him with disdain now stood radiant, her eyes shining with a courage forged in years of struggle and hope. The breeze carried the scent of salt and fresh beginnings, wrapping around them like a secret only the universe was witness to. Their hands found each other, fingers interlacing with a tenderness that spoke of forgiveness, resilience, and the quiet victory of two hearts that refused to give up. As vows were exchanged, it wasn't just a promise for the future. It was a declaration that love had survived every storm, every scar, and every silent tear shed in the darkness. The sand beneath their feet wasn't just earth. It was a foundation laid by time, pain, and unwavering faith. 2 years passed like a delicate melody, sometimes slow and haunting, other times wild and joyful, but always moving forward with a rhythm that belonged only to them. Rachel's laughter, once rare and tentative, now filled their modest home with a warmth that chased away shadows. Jason continued to build his dreams, not just in steel and glass but in the life they were creating together. Layer by layer, moment by moment. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, Rachel placed her hand on her belly, a soft glow of new life blossoming beneath her skin. The news came quietly, almost humbly, like a whispered blessing after a long winter. They sat together, fingers entwined, breathing in the miracle of a future neither had dared to imagine when they were young and broken. This baby wasn't just a child. It was a symbol of hope reborn, a testament that love, when true, can bloom even from the hardest ground. Tears spilled freely as they dreamed aloud of the life awaiting them, their hearts swelling with a joy so profound it felt almost sacred. But the journey to this moment was not without its shadows. Memories of Arthur's bitter threats and accusations lingered like ghosts in the quiet corners of their minds. Rachel still grappled with moments of doubt, the weight of old wounds threatening to dim the light they had fought so hard to kindle. Yet Jason's presence was an unshakable anchor, steady, patient, and filled with a love that refused to yield. They learned that love wasn't the absence of pain but the courage to face it together. On sleepless nights and in whispered conversations, they wove a tapestry of trust and understanding, stitching their souls closer with every challenge. Their love story was no longer about who they once were in high school halls but about who they chose to be now. Two imperfect people daring to dream beyond the limits set by their pasts. Each day was a victory, each smile a triumph, each heartbeat a quiet ode to the power of enduring love. The wedding on that beach was more than a ceremony. It was a rebirth. Jason and Rachel were not the teenagers from those painful high school days, but warriors who had battled loneliness, rejection, and despair, and emerged with their spirits intertwined like the roots of ancient trees. The sea bore witness to their promise. The wind carried their laughter into eternity, and the stars seemed to hold their secret vow in the vastness of the night sky. In that sacred space, they discovered that love's true beauty lies not in flawless beginnings but in the grace of second chances. Theirs was a love that didn't seek perfection but celebrated resilience, a love that honored scars as badges of honor. As the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Rachel's green eyes sparkled with unshed tears, and Jason's usually composed smile softened into something utterly vulnerable, a glimpse of the boy who had dreamed of this moment long before he knew what love really meant. The story that had once begun with rejection and cruelty now culminated in a promise that transcended time and circumstance. Rachel often thought about those days when she had rejected Jason so harshly, her heart heavy with youthful pride and ignorance. Now she saw how every moment of pain had carved the path that led them here, to a love that was fierce, tender, and unbreakable. Jason's sketches, once hidden and secretive, had become the silent witnesses of a love that matured in the shadows. They found a dusty box in the attic one rainy afternoon filled with those drawings, portraits of her, of their small dreams, of a future he never stopped believing in. They laughed and cried, holding those fragile pieces of their past, grateful that love had not only survived but had grown into something breathtakingly real. Love, Rachel whispered to Jason that day, isn't about how you start. It's about how you keep fighting for each other, no matter what. And so, beneath that endless sky and amidst the gentle waves, Jason and Rachel stood hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held. Their love was a living testament to the truth that beauty is not in appearances, nor in fleeting moments of youth and popularity. It is found in courage, in forgiveness, and in the quiet strength of hearts that choose each other again and again. As the sun set, painting the horizon with hues of hope and promise, Rachel felt a peace she had never known, a peace born from a love that had conquered time, fear, and doubt. This was more than a story about a boy and a girl. It was about the power of love to transform, to heal, and to create a new beginning even after the darkest storms. Together, they stepped forward into their shared future, not as two broken souls, but as one unwavering love, forever bound by the tides of fate and the endless promise of tomorrow.